Most people think of Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code when they hear the words Opus Dei, imagining secret rituals and hidden chambers. But what if the truth is far darker than fiction? Welcome to Legal AF with Court Accountability Action. I'm Melissa Bowen, filling in for Lisa Graves, and today I'm joined by journalist and author Gareth Gore, who has exposed one of the most powerful and secretive organizations inside the Catholic Church. His book, Opus Dei, The Cult of Dark Money, Human Trafficking, and Right-Wing Conspiracy Inside the Catholic Church, has just been reissued in paperback with new revelations following an extraordinary year marked by the death of Pope Francis and the rise of a new American Pope, Leo XIV. Gareth, speaking from London, explains that his journey into this shadowy world began by accident. As a financial reporter covering the collapse of a Spanish bank, he discovered that Opus Dei had taken control of it back in the 1952, using it as a cash machine to fund global expansion into political and financial power centers around the world. From Madrid to Washington, they built an empire of influence, even founding recruitment schools for underprivileged girls under the guise of charity. But behind that facade, Gareth found an abusive and manipulative cult that caused immense suffering while trying to reshape societies according to a strict reactionary vision. In the United States, their influence reaches deep into conservative circles, touching figures like Kevin Roberts of the Heritage Foundation, Leonard Leo, the architect of the conservative Catholic takeover of the U.S. Supreme Court, former Attorney General Bill Barr, Rick Santorum, and others who have long supported the group's mission. When asked how such an organization could not only survive but thrive within the Church, Gareth points to the Vatican's long history of support. Since the 1942, Opus Dei has enjoyed full legitimacy from Rome. And under Pope John Paul II, that bond grew even stronger. John Paul viewed them as his loyal spiritual army, granting them a special legal status in 1982 that freed them from oversight by local bishops. This autonomy allowed decades of unchallenged abuse and manipulation to go unchecked until Pope Francis began to act. 3 years ago, reports of psychological and spiritual abuse, emotional coercion, and even cases of members being drugged to hide mental illness finally reached the Vatican. At the same time, federal prosecutors in Argentina uncovered an alleged human trafficking network linked to Opus Dei's operations, a case now heading toward trial. In response, Pope Francis demanded reform, insisting the group clean up its practices. But before those changes could take hold, he passed away, leaving behind an unfinished mission. Now his successor, Pope Leo XIV, inherits the problem, and the world is watching to see what he will do. Will he finish what Francis started and dismantle the power structure of one of the Church's most controversial orders? Or will Opus Dei continue its shadow reign under a new papacy? In the next part, Gareth reveals what Pope Leo is preparing to announce, and why his decision could reshape not just Opus Dei, but the future of the entire Catholic Church. In recent months, the Vatican has been buzzing with anticipation over what Pope Leo XIV will decide to do about Opus Dei, and Gareth Gore explains that we may be on the verge of seeing one of the most dramatic shakeups in the Church's modern history. 3 years ago, Pope Francis made the first major move against the organization after hearing numerous reports of psychological, emotional, and spiritual abuse taking place behind closed doors. There were testimonies from members who claimed they had been manipulated, silenced, and even drugged to conceal the mental distress caused by the group's strict internal practices. Then came the bombshell from Argentina, where federal prosecutors uncovered evidence of a vast network of alleged human trafficking linked to Opus Dei's operations. The case is expected to go to trial soon, and if proven true, it could expose a system of exploitation that has been hidden for decades under the Church's protection. In response to these revelations, Francis demanded that Opus Dei reform itself, issuing clear instructions to clean house and align with Catholic values of transparency and compassion. But the organization dragged its feet delaying change, and using its Vatican connections to stall the process. Before Francis could push his reforms through, his death left the issue unresolved, and now the responsibility rests entirely on Pope Leo's shoulders. Gareth explains that since assuming the papacy in May, Leo has been under immense pressure to act decisively. Over the summer, observers began to worry that he might instead bow to conservative forces within the Church. He granted permission for the celebration of the traditional Latin Mass in street. Peter's Basilica, a move Pope Francis had strongly opposed and even restored favor to the controversial American Cardinal Raymond Burke, who had been previously expelled from his Vatican residence. Leo praised Burke's service to the Church and invited him back, sparking alarm among progressives who saw these gestures as signs that Leo might be reversing Francis's reforms. Then came word that Leo was considering returning control of a Franco-era shrine in northern Spain, a sacred site Francis had stripped from Opus Dei back into the organization's hands. For many, these concessions were warning signals that the new pope could be compromising with the very forces Francis had tried to contain. Gareth admits that during this period, he feared Pope Leo might abandon the effort to reform Opus Dei altogether, appearing to appease reactionary factions for the sake of unity. But in the last few days, signs have emerged that tell a different story. Reliable Vatican sources now indicate that Pope Leo is preparing to take bold and potentially historic action against Opus Dei, action that could effectively dismantle the organization's power base and redefine its role in the Catholic Church. The proof will be in the pudding, Gareth says cautiously, but it looks like Leo may be ready to finish what Francis started. Still, the question remains: will such reforms truly dismantle a system that has operated in secrecy and influence for nearly a century, or will Opus Dei simply adapt and go underground, continuing its mission under a new disguise? In the next part, Gareth breaks down exactly what Pope Leo's reforms might look like and how far the Vatican is willing to go to end one of the most controversial chapters in modern Catholic history. According to Gareth Gore, early reports coming out of the Vatican suggest that Pope Leo XIV's plan will go much further than anyone expected, amounting to what some insiders describe as the virtual dismantling of Opus Dei. From what's been leaked so far, it appears that Leo intends to strip the organization of its authority over lay members, which is devastating because lay Catholics are the very foundation of Opus Dei's existence. Losing them would mean losing about 98% of its membership, leaving only the group's ordained priests under formal Vatican recognition. The lay followers, who once lived under strict obedience to Opus Dei's spiritual directors, will now be free to volunteer or associate with its projects, but can no longer turn to the organization for spiritual guidance or moral formation, core practices that have long allowed Opus Dei to control the lives, careers, and consciences of its members. Instead, those responsibilities will be handled by local dioceses, ending the organization's independence in matters of faith and personal discipline. On paper, these reforms represent a severe blow, cutting away the system of authority that sustained Opus Dei for nearly a century. Yet Gareth is skeptical about how much will actually change in practice. He calls Opus Dei a cult centered around the worship of its founder, the Spanish priest Josemaria Escrivá, who has been canonized as a saint and whose writings are treated by followers almost as divine revelation. Members believe Escrivá received a direct vision from God, outlining the rules for their organization in meticulous detail, rules that include extreme acts of penance like self-flagellation and wearing metal chains around the legs as a sign of humility and obedience. These rituals and the theology behind them have become sacred law for Opus Dei's devotees, who see any deviation as betrayal not only of their founder but of God's will itself. Gareth argues that even if the Vatican officially dismantles their structure, most members will continue following Escriva's teachings privately, convinced that divine instructions override papal decrees. Publicly, they'll likely express loyalty to Pope Leo and claim to accept his reforms. But behind the scenes, they'll simply go underground, continuing their old practices unofficially and rebuilding their influence quietly through personal networks. This, Gareth warns, is how the organization has always survived pressure from the outside, by retreating into secrecy, waiting for a more sympathetic pope, and re-emerging stronger than before. The Vatican can modify legal statutes, but changing a deeply rooted belief system is another matter entirely. For Opus Dei's most devoted followers, faith and identity are indistinguishable, bound to the conviction that their founder's vision came directly from heaven. In other words, you can dissolve an organization on paper, but you can't easily erase a movement from the hearts of its believers. In the next part, Gareth explains how Opus Dei's political and financial power, especially in the United States, could keep its mission alive despite the Vatican's efforts to dismantle it, and why some of the most powerful conservative figures in the world may have no intention of letting it. Gareth Gore explains that Opus Dei has never just been a spiritual movement. From the very beginning, it has been a political project disguised as religious devotion. Behind the language of holiness and service, its real goal has always been influence, placing its members in key professional and political positions to shape policy, culture, and law, according to a far-right vision of Catholic morality. Over the decades, this has meant recruiting wealthy donors, cultivating elite connections, and quietly advancing a network that merges faith with power. Many of its adherents are deeply embedded in government, finance, and think tanks, using their positions to push a reactionary agenda while maintaining an image of moral integrity. Gareth describes how the organization's spiritual guidance sessions often serve as subtle mechanisms of control, shaping the thoughts and choices of people in high places without them even realizing it. That's how Opus Dei has managed to influence politics from Madrid to Washington, D.C. for nearly a century. But as news of Pope Leo's upcoming reform spreads, the question now is how these powerful benefactors will respond. The group's wealthy donors, its political allies, and its deeply entrenched members are not likely to simply surrender their influence. The leader of Opus Dei already released a letter after word of the Vatican's intentions leaked, urging members to carry on with family traditions, a phrase that insiders understand as code for continuing their mission, regardless of papal opposition. The letter acknowledged difficult times but promised better days ahead, suggesting that they will outlast Pope Leo's reforms and wait for a new pontiff more sympathetic to their cause. Gareth believes this is exactly what will happen. For many of Opus Dei's most prominent followers, figures like Leonard Leo, Kevin Roberts, and other conservative Catholic leaders, the ideology of Opus Dei has become deeply intertwined with their personal identities and political missions. It offers not only a spiritual justification for their beliefs, but also a sense of divine legitimacy for their actions. This is why, he explains, so many of them use religion to defend controversial policies, from anti-abortion laws to harsh immigration crackdowns, even when those stances conflict with the compassion and mercy taught by the broader Church. Gareth mentions that politicians like J.D. Vance have even tried to justify aggressive border operations and family separations, using distorted interpretations of Catholic doctrine, arguments that both Pope Francis and Pope Leo have publicly rejected as completely un-Christian. Yet, despite papal correction, these figures continue invoking faith as political cover, convinced they represent a truer, more authentic version of Catholicism. That mindset makes them unlikely to abandon Opus Dei, even if it's officially dismantled. They will continue their work discreetly, funding aligned institutions, mentoring new members, and spreading their ideology through think tanks and universities, all while keeping formal ties hidden. Gareth concludes that this dual reality, public obedience to Rome, private loyalty to Opus Dei, is precisely how the organization has survived every Vatican reform attempt in the past, and if history is any guide, it will try to do so again. In the next part, Gareth explores whether these reforms could deepen the existing rift within the Catholic Church itself and how Pope Leo's decisions may either heal or shatter the fragile unity left behind by Pope Francis. When asked whether Pope Leo XIV's reforms could create a deeper divide within the Catholic Church, Gareth Gore admits that the rift already exists and has for years. The tension between progressive and conservative factions has been widening since the days of Pope Francis, who angered the religious right by openly challenging their political agendas and calling out behavior he believed contradicted true Christian teaching. Francis didn't hesitate to criticize Donald Trump's policies, describing them as un-Christian, and he directly rebuked politicians like J.D. Vance, who twisted church doctrine to justify harsh immigration crackdowns and family separations. Those moments, Gareth explains, drew a clear line between the compassionate vision of Francis and the authoritarian moralism of the Catholic far right. When Pope Leo was elected, many conservatives saw him as a possible bridge, a figure who could reconcile the two sides of the Church. His early gestures, such as welcoming back Cardinal Raymond Burke and allowing the Latin Mass to return to St. Peter's Basilica, were taken as olive branches meant to restore a sense of unity among traditionalists who felt alienated under Francis. For a time, it seemed like Leo wanted to bring these factions back into the fold, offering small concessions to ease their resentment. Yet, beneath the surface, Gareth believes Leo has been walking a tightrope, trying to hold the Church together while confronting the darkness that has been festering inside it. His dilemma is profound. If he moves too harshly against Opus Dei and other ultra-conservative groups, he risks alienating millions of traditional Catholics who view them as defenders of orthodoxy. But if he does nothing, he allows a culture of abuse and corruption to continue unchecked within the heart of the Church. Gareth describes Leo's strategy as an attempt to strike a delicate balance, doing what is morally necessary without tearing the Church apart. By granting some symbolic gestures to conservatives, like the shrine in Spain or Cardinal Burke's rehabilitation, Leo may be buying time and political space to carry out more significant reforms behind the scenes. Yet when the announcement about Opus Dei finally comes, Gareth warns, it could ignite a storm. He predicts outrage in Spain, where Opus Dei still holds strong influence, and shockwaves across the United States, where the organization's wealthy supporters have deeply infiltrated the conservative Catholic and Republican elite. For them, these reforms will be seen not just as a religious decision, but as a political betrayal. Still, Gareth believes Pope Leo feels compelled to act. He cannot, as he puts it, sit on the sidelines while abuse continues. Even if it risks deepening existing fractures, Leo seems determined to draw a line to separate genuine faith from manipulation disguised as holiness. In Gareth's words, he's trying to do the right thing without destroying what's left of the Church's unity. Whether he succeeds or not, his decision will mark a turning point in modern Catholic history. The Church has faced internal crises before, but this moment, this confrontation between truth and tradition, may define the direction of Catholicism for decades to come. As the world waits for Pope Leo XIV's formal announcement, Gareth Gore believes we are standing at a historic crossroads for the Catholic Church. For years, Opus Dei operated in the shadows, wealthy, influential, and virtually untouchable. It survived dictatorships, papal transitions, and scandals by cloaking its ambition in the language of sanctity. Now, for the first time, a pope seems prepared to confront it head-on. If Leo follows through on his plan to strip the organization of power, it will represent the boldest act of internal reform since the Second Vatican Council. But Gareth cautions that dismantling a structure like Opus Dei on paper does not guarantee its disappearance. This is an organization built on secrecy, loyalty, and ideology, and those things don't vanish overnight. Many members view the founder, Saint Josemaria Escrivá, as a prophet who received direct instructions from God. To them, no earthly authority can override his vision. That belief could make the group's underground survival almost inevitable. Even without formal authority, former members and allies will continue to influence politics, education, and religious life through personal networks and immense financial resources. In the United States especially, where Opus Dei's reach runs through think tanks, law firms, and donor circles, Gareth expects their ideology to persist under new names and faces. What remains uncertain is how the faithful will respond. Will ordinary Catholics embrace Leo's reforms as a step toward justice and transparency, or will conservative resistance fracture the Church even further? Gareth's hope is that Leo's leadership will spark renewal, a chance to rebuild faith around humility, service, and compassion rather than control and fear. Yet he acknowledges the danger that, if handled poorly, this confrontation could unleash years of division. The coming months, he says, will determine not just the future of Opus Dei, but the moral credibility of the Vatican itself. In a world increasingly skeptical of organized religion, Leo's actions could show that the Church still has the courage to confront its own corruption, to acknowledge the pain it has caused, and to lead with truth. Gareth ends our conversation with a quiet but powerful thought. The Church can survive scandals and crises. What it cannot survive is silence. As this story unfolds, one thing is certain: the battle for the soul of Catholicism has entered a defining chapter. Whether Pope Leo's reforms bring healing or upheaval, they will be remembered as the moment when the Vatican finally chose to face its most secretive order and decide what kind of church it truly wants to be.